In today's world of recording, a lot of people are going to tell you to play it safe. Don't add high pass filters. Don't add EQ. Save that for after in the DAW. That way you won't paint yourself in a corner. You won't mess anything up. I do not agree with this. My philosophy is you go and you use what you got. If you have EQs, you use them because you're trying to bring life out of the track and to kind of give yourself a sound that makes sense for the song, all right? There's a great interview I'm about to show you guys where Andrew Scheps is talking to Darrell Thorp, who worked on Beck, Radiohead, he worked with the Foo Fighters, he's worked with Thurston Moore, Sonic Youth. He's worked with tons and tons of people. He's won, I think he said 8 Grammys. The point is, this dude has his own philosophy and his own way of looking at things when you record, and I think it's valid. You all should hear what's going on here. So check this out. This is fair use for teaching purposes.
Glenn says, I'm curious about the big fat snare sounds on Beck records. It reminds me of a certain late 70s sound, but even more over the top. Are they recorded with fabric on the drum and or tape, etc., or is it just a combination of EQ, effects, and possibly samples?
Yes. Next question. No, it's actually there's above. Generally, funny enough, there's generally no samples, but yet funny enough though, it is usually a 70s drum. For purposes of NDAs, I won't say which model.
Drop whatever model you think it is in the comments. Let's talk about it.
But you can figure it out. But at the same time, yeah, it can be a combination of sometimes the drum is just tuned perfectly and it doesn't need it. But at the same token, there is the T-towel aspect of you take a piece of gaff tape and if the drum is this, you just sort of lay it across the edge of the drum, and that really, really dampens it without muting it. And that's a big part of the tone as well. But it is also a 57 top and bottom going through an load of EQ. It just is.
That's a technical term.
Yeah. As well.
I think one thing we've learned here, and it's, I want to make sure that people actually understand it, that a lot of your processing is EQ. Mm-hmm. And it's not magic EQ, it's EQ. And people are afraid to EQ.
The same stuff you have, it's just a lot of it.
Yeah. But look, it's like the Chris Lord Algae when he's mixing his parallel EQ on the snare, because basically plus 15 is not enough. Mm-hmm. It may not be enough, and people get really scared when they see the way the knobs are set, like, oh, well, I'm not supposed to do that. Like, but maybe you were 20 dB shy at that frequency, then you need 20. Just do what you do. So everyone should go out and EQ some things.
Yeah, and I think through the conversation too, Andrew, is, and I get it, man. I had that same mindset at one point in time. There's something really scary, I don't know why, about this whole like committal thing as far as, obviously it's changed a little bit with Pro Tools because everything's a little bit more post-E, right? So you can change it back if you made a mistake. But there was this big thing about, well, I don't know, I shouldn't put the API EQ at 10 kilohertz, 10K on a shelf and do 9 dB. I just shouldn't do that. And then God forbid if I go to 12 dB.
And then put it through a Pultec.
But I will say, like, the one thing I learned from Nigel is he was so aggressive with that stuff. And then sometimes it would, quote unquote, bite him in the and he was just like, well, I guess I made it too bright. Oh, well, should we get a cup of tea?
Yeah, because look, unless you're distorting it a lot, EQ is something you can undo.
Yes.
It's addition and subtraction. It's not dynamics processing, which you can't undo.
So I think that the fans should keep that in mind of like, crank it up.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Use the...
Yeah, and one of the things about doing it on the way in before you go through an A to D is that it's fixed point architecture. It's analog electronics. Like it will take care of itself for you. It'll be really obvious if you're distorting it. You don't get into the thing where if you add 30 dB of EQ in the Pro Tools mixer, you can get yourself into trouble if you don't understand how it all works in there. Whereas in the analog domain, it's either distorted to or it isn't.
Right. Right. Correct. Going into a studio that has really cool gear, man, turn the on. Use it.
Yeah.
Because it's fun, one, and it sounds good. It really does.
Yeah.
Yeah, even if you're just lightly, it's still doing.
Yeah, and look, I'm a huge proponent of digital. I think it's awesome. I would never want to mix on an analog desk again. I just wouldn't.
Right.
But when it comes out of the microphone, it's still a voltage, and the more you can do to it while it's still a voltage, the better. Once it's in there, fine.
It's in there.
You can do anything you want in the box, and it's going to sound amazing. But while it's out there, if there's gear there, just use it. It's a totally different thing.
I just want to play you one more clip from this where Darrell Thorp talks about working with Beck when he recorded Morning Phase with him and what Beck was saying to him the whole time. It's kind of funny. Check this out.
I would get really good sounds, Andrew. Really good. And he would go, bigger, brighter, more, bigger. Like literally like a bloodthirsty mad scientist in the back looking for sonics. More! And I figured out ways to get more. And I in some tokens I was kind of like, are you kidding me? Like, Beck, before you say more, are you actually listening what's coming out of the speakers real quick? Or are you just saying more for the sake of just screaming more, like some sort of mad, like a mad scientist? And I don't know, maybe he was listening or maybe he wasn't, but I will say this, I learned a lot from that session. I learned how far you could push sonics, because I do think there is it's analogy to me. It's always the analogy of cooking. You can definitely overcook a steak. Yeah. And there are times when I'm looking at Beck going, Beck, we're in the realms of jerky here. Do you want a beautiful piece of filet mignon, medium rare, with some butter on it, or do you want jerky? Because we're going down jerky. As a point, you reach this weird sonic, like they've gone to plaid, where it's distorting and it's breaking up and it's harmonically like freaking out and you can't figure out why. Like I found that threshold. However, because he was screaming more, I figured out how to get to that level, but then surpass it with other multi-chaining EQs or putting Pultex on 10 with an API path after it at +6, then with a fab filter on the insert. Well, because the fab filter doesn't do the phase shifting, so when you brighten things up, it just kind of gets open and airy. So it was like literally just kind of like, dude, this is crazy.
And was it mostly EQ?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. A little bit of compression here or there, or two compressors in series. But yeah, it was a lot of EQ.
On the way in, if you're using any sort of EQ on your vocals, on your guitars, on your whatever, there's really no limit to what you can do if it's benefiting the sound. Don't be hampered by anything, including how many dB you can add on any particular frequency on one EQ. You can run things in parallel. You can double up on EQ. You can use, chains of EQ like they're talking about. All right. Also, keep in mind what he said about it's a voltage. When you record in the analog world, you're more free to do whatever, and there'll be less of a detrimental effect. You'll notice it if it's distorting, and don't want to do that unless you're going for that, right? And you'll notice if something terrible is happening by what you're adding. It'll be obvious. And if not, then it could be helping. What you're doing could be helping. Open ears, open mind, and don't be afraid to experiment. Also, you can undo EQ afterwards in the DAW because it's just pluses and minuses. So you can easily do that. So don't be scared to use EQ. That's the number one theme is these dudes are fearless with what they're doing. Fearless. You got to be that way too. Don't be held back by anything, including what the dial looks like and what number it's on. Also, dynamics is not something that can be undone. So less on the dynamic front when it comes to what you're doing out of the box before you're going in, because that's something that was clearly mentioned. Dynamically, he did mention compressors in series because he's doing very little on each one. So in other words, if you're doing something in like one after another in series, you could go a little bit, and then you get a result. But again, keep in mind, less is more with dynamics. You cannot undo the way you could undo EQ. All right. Also, you got to keep those. He got those amazing Beck snare sounds. Some of the best snares I've heard is on Beck records. So I totally appreciated that question and had to throw it to you. Other snares I love is stuff like the Spoon. If you're listening to the band Spoon, their snares are awesome. The sound of this snare on almost every would Kill the Moonlight and but every one. I don't remember the one with the starts with like The Beast, the Dragon, and the Door. That song. Anyway, the Beck. Just listen to any Beck album. The way they get drum sounds is amazing. And the way something I heard for Beck, they're definitely doing this thing where they're deadening the drum out a bit. But I also heard that, when it comes to Spoon specifically, that they're not using cymbals along with the drums a lot of the time. In other words, the cymbals are actually done afterwards, and this just gets a much cleaner sound on your snares, on your toms, on your floor tom, just everything in general without having that cymbal slight reverberation in everything. Once you start hitting things hard, is going to make a big difference in the drum sound. So I'm not sure if that's what they did on Beck, but I just heard that that's something that may have been done on some Spoon stuff. And also some Kinks stuff possibly, but I love the way the Kinks sound. Their drums are another one that's like so amazing, and they sound super dry, so it's possible they're doing that too. All I know is that dead 70s-ish sound I'm a huge fan of. So any other ways that you guys can achieve this, let me know. Also, 57 top and bottom, that's all. They're just using 57s on the snare. Amazing to hear that. That's pretty cool, because I always put a little more love into the snare mic choice in terms of dollar amount, but maybe it's unnecessary. The Beyer Dynamic 201, the M201, that's my go-to snare mic. I love the way it sounds. I also like an Beyer M88 on snare. I'm a big fan of that. Sometimes that will go to the floor tom. It's a great mic in general, the M88. So there's a lot of snare mics out there that are great. A lot of people I know use a Telefunken M80 on snare. There's so many options out there that are great. You get the Steve Albini way, where you're basically using, a large diaphragm condenser or a small diaphragm condenser, but some kind of condenser mic on snare. So there's a lot of different options out there that you could do. But I love this concept of 257s top and bottom on snare. That's cool. That's kind of gangster, if you ask me. So what else? Good stuff. Anyway, let's throw stuff in the comments. I want to hear what you thought. I hope you dug it. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this.